woke up on the morning of my 35th birthday feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves. The soft sunlight filtered through the curtains as I stretched in bed, savoring the promise of celebration my husband Mark had insisted on baking. Pancakes even though neither of us was skilled in the kitchen. I could already hear the faint clatter of bowls and silverware drifting up the stairs. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and smiled at the thought of spending today surrounded by loved ones at our home. By mid-morning our friends started showing up. My childhood friend Jenna came first carrying a bottle of sparkling rose. She gave me a quick hug and complimented the pastel balloon garland we had hung across the living room wall. Soon after our neighbor Tim knocked loudly and set down a plate piled high with homemade cinnamon rolls. The smell of sugar and spice filled the hallway. In the foyer I noticed Mark adjusting the heels on my mother-in-law's feet before offering her a seat. It felt warm. After everyone was settled, Mark called for attention and invited me to sit at the dining table. He cleared his throat and held the box wrapped in glossy paper with a ribbon. My heart fluttered at the sight of the gift. I slid the ribbon and lifted the lid slowly. Inside lay a pair of gold hoop earrings inscribed with our wedding date. I gasped softly and reached for them, but Mark motioned me pause warmly. He looked across the room and asked Olivia to join him at the table. Olivia rose from her seat. Calm. I watched in confusion as she approached Mark at the head of the table. He handed her the earrings. A faint blush spread across her cheeks as she accepted the gift and slid them onto her earlobes. Murmurs rippled through the room and all eyes shifted toward us. My hands tightened into fists under the table and a cold wave of betrayal washed over me. The cake knife rattled against the countertop as I stood, my voice trembling and ready to demand an explanation. My breath caught in my throat. The room held its breath too. Jenna's expression shifted from joy to confusion, while Tim's eyebrows rose high. My mother-in-law set her roll aside and peered at me over her glasses. Mark's face remained calm, but his eyes flickered with something I could not read. Heat rose to my cheeks as I fought to steady myself. The birthday cake sat untouched on the counter, its candles flickering in silent judgment. I cleared my throat and spoke, my words sharp with wounded pride. Mark, I said softly, my voice steady. The room fell quiet as eyes turned to us. Why did you give my birthday gift to Olivia? I paused for his gaze. He swallowed and touched his hair. I thought she wanted a surprise. He murmured, it's not what it looks like. My pulse thundered. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Jenna placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Across the table Olivia looked confused, her earrings gleaming in the afternoon light. The air felt charged with tension. As I stood trembling I realized I would not let this slide. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar rush of determination fill my chest. Memories of every anniversary he had forgotten and every promise unkept surged through my mind. I refused to dismiss my own hurt with polite smiles or apologies. This birthday marked something different. I would speak my truth, even if my voice shook. A hush settled as I squared my shoulders and met Mark's gaze. In that silent moment, I understood where my boundaries lay. A tremor of silence passed through the room. Jenna cleared her throat and whispered my name. I met her eyes, grateful for her support. My mother-in-law looked at Mark with silent disappointment. Tim shifted in his seat, avoiding everyone's gaze. Olivia seemed uncertain, her fingers brushing the earrings as if reconsidering. I felt the weight of my decision settle like stone in my stomach. This confrontation was more than a birthday drama. It was the moment I chose to reclaim my voice and stand up for my worth. Mark opened his mouth to speak but faltered as he saw conviction in my eyes. The guest shifted, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. I pressed for his explanation. Olivia didn't need these earrings, I said firmly. She wasn't the intended recipient. And you know it. A hush followed before Olivia placed a hand on my arm. I'm so sorry, this must be a misunderstanding, she murmured. I glanced at Mark, waiting for him to set things right. He looked down, shoulders slumping. The night was far from over. As tension hung in the room I realized this was the beginning. The guests watched us with a mixture of sympathy. Jenna stood and moved to my side, her presence steadying me. Mark cleared his throat, his voice small. As he spoke, I wanted to surprise her, he said weakly, but I never meant to hurt you. His words went unanswered. I looked around the room, seeing the faces of people who cared about us both. My heart pounded with conflicting emotions as I prepared to decide what came next. The room was thick with tension as I stood rigid beside the dining table, every face in that living room frozen in silent judgment. The half-eaten cake gleamed under the chandelier's light, its scattered rose petals a stark contrast to the bitter swirl in my chest. The murmurs of what just happened, and is she okay, buzzed like angry hornets just out of sight. Mark's shoulders slumped, his guilty eyes fixed on the floor, and Olivia's tears glistened as she awkwardly pushed her chair back, the gold hoops swinging gently from her earlobes. Jenna remained by my side, her hand warm on my back, a tether to the calm I was fighting so hard to reclaim. A slow, hollow ache began to build behind my sternum, and I realized that more than embarrassment coursed through my veins, it was the taste of something far darker, the recognition that I had been sidelined in my own life. Mark cleared his throat in a feeble attempt to break the silence, but the words stuck in his throat like dry bread. I inhaled sharply, the echo of his apology from moments before still hanging in the air, but I knew an apology wouldn't be enough. Not today, on my 35th birthday, when I deserved to feel seen and cherished. Everyone, Mark began, his voice small. This was a misunderstanding. His glance flicked to Olivia, who sniffled and nodded, her cheeks flushed. My mother-in-law adjusted her shawl and pursed her lips, while Tim fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve. Up until now, our friends and family had believed in our happy union, the shared projects, Saturday morning hikes, weekend barbecues in the backyard. But this one act had cracked that facade, and I could see the fault lines glinting in the soft lamplight. I steadied myself, pushing down the urge to flee, to escape into the silence of our bedroom and sob until the world went blurry. Instead, I lifted my chin and spoke, my voice surprisingly even. Mark, I need to understand how you could think giving my gift to someone else, someone you've known for only a few months, would ever be okay. The room fell utterly still, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Jenna's grip on my arm tightened in silent solidarity. Olivia's eyes darted to me, then to the earrings, as she swallowed and forced out a quiet, "I'm sorry." His jaw clenched. I wanted to surprise her, he said, each word measured as though he were afraid to say too much. "She's been going through a hard time at work," and I thought. His voice broke. His attempt at kindness had exploded into a public humiliation. I remembered the late-night Zoom calls she'd complained about, the looming deadlines she'd shared at our dinner parties. He had used our celebration as stage lighting for her sorrow. A bitter smile twisted at the corner of my lips. "I get that you care about her," I said, "but this celebration was for me. It was my birthday, my turning 35, and when you handed her my gift, you handed me my worthlessness in front of everyone I love." My heart hammered, but I refused to look away from his eyes. I needed him to see me, to recognize the fracture he'd created. Olivia rose quietly, removing one earring and offering it back with trembling fingers. "I shouldn't have accepted this," she whispered. "I'll give it back." Mark hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Liv, don't." But she stepped forward anyway and laid the gold hoop on the table. The ribbon curled beside it like a wounded snake. A ripple passed through the guests as they realized this was more than an awkward party moment. It was a reckoning. Jenna exhaled softly. "Hannah, do you want to sit down?" she prompted gently. I nodded and eased onto the edge of the chair, still close enough to feel the wood's hard edges beneath me. Mark remained standing, as though he hadn't realized he was still upright. I looked around the room at the scattered streamers, the half-filled wine glasses, the toppled pinwheel centerpiece. This was supposed to be a birthday celebration, but it had become something else, an unmasking. "I love you, Mark," I said quietly, and the room seemed to lean in at that admission. But love isn't enough when trust is broken so carelessly. My mother-in-law cleared her throat. "Perhaps you both need some time alone," she suggested in her measured tone. Even she, with her old-fashioned beliefs, could see that nothing anyone said in a crowded room could salvage this moment. Mark's eyes met mine, searching, pleading. I felt a pang of compassion for the man I had married, the man who had built me up and let me down, sometimes in the same breath. But I had learned over the years that kindness without accountability is cruelty in disguise. "I agree," I said softly. "We need to talk, really talk, when it's just the two of us." The guests began to rise, murmuring their goodbyes. Tim patted Mark awkwardly on the shoulder, then gave me a sympathetic nod. Olivia hovered in the background, clutching her small purse. Avoiding my gaze, Jenna stayed behind to help me gather discarded napkins and whisk away torn wrapping paper. As the last balloon deflated softly in the corner, I felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. Relief that I had spoken my truth and set a boundary. Trepidation for the conversation that lay ahead, one that would demand honesty, vulnerability, and perhaps the hardest thing of all, deciding whether our marriage could withstand the breach. Mark opened his mouth to speak one last time before the door closed, but no words came. Instead, he reached out tentatively and brushed a stray strand of hair from my face. In that quiet gesture, I saw both apology and hope. I closed my eyes, leaning into his touch for just a moment, and felt the crossroads before us, forgiveness or departure. When the front door finally clicked shut, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the echo of our scattered voices, I turned to face him fully. The half-eaten cake sat on the counter, its candles long extinguished. It was time to light a new flame, one fueled by honest conversation, clear boundaries, And the choice to rebuild or walk away. Part 2 would begin here, in the quiet aftermath, as we navigated the fragile path between betrayal and redemption. And I, Hannah, 35 years old, with every birthday candle behind me and every possibility before me, would not let this very gift be the last mark of my worth. The hush that followed the click of the front door lingered between us like dust in a shaft of late afternoon light. We stood facing each other in the middle of the living room, the remnants of my birthday celebration scattered at our feet, a half-eaten cake on the counter, curling streamers on the floor, and the solitary gold hoop earring resting on the table like an accusation. I swallowed against the lump in my throat, steadying my beating heart. This was the moment everything would change. Mark cleared his throat, his voice strained. I could see the remorse in his eyes, the regret that had crept up on him the moment he realized what he'd done. He took a step forward, then paused, uncertainty rooting him in place. I folded my arms loosely, projecting calm I did not feel. The afternoon sun cast his shadow long across the carpet, and I knew I had to speak before the weight of his guilt and my hurt became too heavy to bear. "I'm sorry, Hannah," he began, voice low. He closed the distance and knelt beside the table, picking up the earring and turning it in his fingers. "I don't have an excuse that makes sense. I thought I was doing something kind. But I see now how thoughtless it was." He met my eyes, voice trembling. "I hurt you. And I'm ashamed." My chest tightened. I had rehearsed my response in my head countless times since the party, but they all felt inadequate now that I was looking at the man I loved more than anyone. "You didn't just hurt me, Mark," I said quietly. "You humiliated me. You made me question my place in our marriage, in front of our friends and family." My voice caught as I pointed toward the untouched cake. I sat there wondering if you even know who I am anymore. Silence pressed against us, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic outside and the soft ticking of the hallway clock. Mark straightened and ran a hand through his hair, frustration and sorrow mingling on his face. "I know you," he said. "I know you better than anyone, but I lost sight of what today was about." Tears welled in my eyes and I breathed out sharply, brushing them away. "That's the problem," I replied. "Somewhere along the way, I feel like you lost sight of us." I moved around the table, curling my fingers around the ribbon that had once tied the earrings so neatly. I held it up. This was meant to be a celebration of me, of us, of our story together. Instead it became a performance for someone else's pain. He stepped closer, gently taking the ribbon from my hand. "I see that now," he whispered. "I was selfish in trying to fix Olivia's problems on your special day. I should have been thinking about you first." He hesitated, swallowing. "I want to make it right. Please tell me how." I let myself consider his words. Beneath the shock and anger, there was love, old love. The kind that had carried us through long-distance moves, layoffs, and the sleepless nights after our first miscarriage. That love was still there, like embers waiting to be stoked. But it needed honesty first, I said, meeting his gaze. "I need you to understand how this felt. I want you to imagine your birthday party, the gift you'd been longing for in that glossy box, handed to someone else by your wife. Feel how hollow that would be." He closed his eyes, nodding slowly. I continued. "Then I need you to apologize to Olivia properly. She didn't deserve to be a pawn in our drama and she needs to know it wasn't her fault." I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "And finally, I need you to commit to putting me first, especially on days that matter to me." A single nod, then a heavy exhale. "I will," he promised. He reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers. His thumb brushed over my knuckles. "I love you more than I love being right or helping anyone but you. I messed up, but I'll spend every day making it up to you if you'll let me." My heart throbbed in my chest. The sincerity in his tone, the remorse in his eyes, it was everything I needed to hear, but the breach still ached, like a wound that might scar. I squeezed his hand. "This will take time," I said, voice gentle. "Trust is earned, not given. I don't want grand gestures. I want small things. Your attention, your presence, remembering the little details." He nodded again, a curve of determination in his expression. "I can do that. I want to do that." He paused, glancing toward the table where the earring lay. "Should we pack this up and give it back to Olivia together?" I considered it. Olivia's pain had been real and she'd accepted the gift innocently. "Yes," I agreed. "Let's handle it together." We walked side by side to her apartment, the ribbon coiled in Mark's pocket. The evening sky was streaked with pink and gold as we rang her doorbell. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see us both. "I wanted to apologize," Mark said, his tone earnest. He held out the little velvet box, now empty. "Hannah's birthday was about her and I was wrong to give this to you. I hope you'll forgive me for the way I handled it." Olivia's eyes filled with tears again and she shook her head slowly. "No. Thank you for coming together," she replied. "I'm the one who should apologize for any awkwardness. I never meant to cause trouble." She invited us in for a moment of reconciliation and I felt the last of the tension ease. Walking home under a canopy of stars, Mark slipped his arm around my waist. I leaned into him, warmth spreading through me. "Thank you for doing this with me," he whispered. "Thank you for giving us a chance." I looked up at his profile, the streetlight catching the curve of his cheek. "Thank you for listening," I replied. "That's all I ever wanted." By the time we reached our front door, the night felt soft around us, forgiving. We paused, and I turned to face him fully. Our eyes met, and in that silent exchange I felt the possibility of healing. The betrayal hadn't vanished, but it had been named, owned, and confronted. Now, in the hush of midnight, we could begin to rebuild. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, and he followed. The living room was dark, the cake and streamers long gone. But in the quiet darkness, I felt something else flicker to life, the promise that although a single gift had nearly unraveled us, we could choose to knit our lives back together with deeper threads of understanding and care. And so, on the night I nearly lost my worth and reclaimed it instead, we found our way home to each other once more.